Hello, you're listening to Linguistically Aware, a 30-minute conversation-based podcast about the ways we use, understand, and think about language. My name is Dusan, a grad student of linguistics at the University of Calgary, and I'm sitting down with linguists, experts who study language, to talk about a number of roles language plays in our lives. This is CJSW 90.9 FM broadcasting on the traditional territories of all the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 of southern Alberta. Today, I talk to Corey Telfer, a researcher and a sessional instructor at the University of Calgary, whose work revolves around Stoney Nakoda, an indigenous language spoken in the territory of the Calgary area. This is the second part of our conversation, in which we talked about the ways indigenous languages are preserved and documented. We also talked about his role as a linguist in documentation and preservation, and how the general public can help in this important process. So stay tuned and enjoy our conversation. Corey, you worked with the TLC, the Language Conservancy, longer than I have. Can you share your experience in collaborating and working with them?
Well, yeah, first of all, I should mention that actually I only worked with the Language Conservancy a few more months before you started.
Oh, okay.
So only since this project started in the fall of last year, fall of 2019. And so just over a year now, I've been working with them. And we started off this project with a huge rapid word collection where we brought together the Language Conservancy and Stoney Education Authority brought together 30 or more, well, really more elders, but roughly about 30 a day. It's broken into about 8 groups, and each group had a scribe, or usually a linguist was the scribe, but not everyone was a linguist. Scribe, a linguist or someone experienced with writing indigenous languages. In some cases, there are people who've worked with the TLC on other projects, and so they've gained some experience in this area. And each group was collecting words from a particular semantic domain. So some people would be asked, these are words for different things about the weather. How do you say these words about weather? Another group might be documenting body parts. Another group might be documenting finances and money, things like that, or growing things, or hunting, or the stars and the moon and the sun. So all these different groups managed to gather over 14,000 entries. Now, some of those will be doubles because different groups would have been accidentally getting some words at the same time, but a huge number of words were collected in a very short amount of time. That was over a period of 2 weeks. So that's when I started working with them. And but in my past, I have worked with other First Nations communities as well, including the Alexis Nakota Sioux First Nation up northwest of Edmonton. And also I've done a small amount of work with the Haida First Nation on Haida Gwaii, which was formerly known as the Queen Charlotte Islands. Some people might know it by that name, off the west coast of Canada in British Columbia. So so I've worked with those communities as well, but nothing as extensive as this project. This is a very extensive project with lots of different resources being developed and a tremendous number of people involved. So it's been quite unique and a really positive experience. And the Language Conservancy is really leading the way in doing this kind of work where it's really engaging a lot of people all at once. Now, that does bring up some complications, but it brings advantages too. Whereas the linguistic tradition is one linguist working with maybe 3 or 4 different fluent speakers, sometimes only one fluent speaker. So it is good to definitely have more than one fluent speaker involved when we're documenting a language. But this is a different way of doing things than we're used to maybe as linguists, and so it takes some adjusting, but it's been a really positive experience overall, and I think really good for the language and for the community. So I'm really looking forward to when some of these resources can be released and people can appreciate their hard work and the hard work of their elders.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. My next question would be a seemingly simple question, a question that we get asked a lot. Why is it important to document an indigenous language?
Yeah, that's a question linguists get asked a lot, isn't it? And it's a
Mhm.
very difficult question in a certain way,
Yeah.
um, because sometimes it feels hard to justify maintaining a language when it's not a it's not a critical human need to speak a specific language. If we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs or something, preserving languages doesn't even fall on the hierarchy. It's not there.
Yeah.
Um, but uh, I was, and there are a lot of good reasons though to document a language, and we have to think to ourselves, well, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and staying alive are very important to us humans. There's other things that are also important to us that go well beyond just basic survival. And I think when it comes to language, is obviously it's a huge part of culture and identity. And um, along with that identity is feeling, I think, feeling valued. Feeling valued by other human beings is very important. And that does affect Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If people don't feel valued, if they feel like their culture and their identity doesn't matter or is less than other people's, obviously then their very survival is endangered. And we've seen exactly that happen with residential schools here in Canada. And
Yeah.
the history of residential schools here and devaluing other people's language, culture, and identity has had such a devastating impact on these communities. It can never be overemphasized. And it because it makes people feel like they're worthless. And so what we're doing here is the opposite of that, and making it clear that they are worth a lot, and that these languages and cultures are just as valuable as any other languages and cultures in the world, and that they should be preserved and taught and maintained in the households and communities where they came from, and maybe even learned by others outside of those communities. So
Yeah.
I
Of
think
course.
that is actually the number one reason for this, for preserving these languages, documenting these languages. But there are other reasons as well. Of course, the other reasons are much more academic usually.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, I think everybody can relate to that, the importance of culture, identity, and feeling valued. But us linguists also know that language encodes, and other people know this too. Now, it can get, sometimes people's understanding of this gets and popular culture has kind of twisted this a little bit, but language does encode a lot of how we think. Now, the popular culture version might be that language can control how we think. Most linguists feel that it's actually the opposite. um, Language tells us, shows us actually how we're already thinking. So language reflects thought rather than controls thought, is how I would frame it. I don't know if you agree with that. And
Of course.
yeah, okay. I mean, most linguists do, but there is some
Yeah.
evidence that maybe some things in language can influence our thoughts a tiny degree or a little bit. But most of us still feel, by and large, it seems to be the other way around, where our
Mhm.
thoughts influence the way our languages are organized. And therefore, when we look at how languages are organized, it can tell us about how human thoughts are organized, how humans organize the world cognitively, from how our brains work to some degree. Um, so an example of this is, I was just reading recently about the Australian language Gearbal, which
Mhm.
has noun classes where things are divided into different nouns in the world, different items in the world are divided into four different categories. And famously, one of the categories is called women, fire, and dangerous things. So, and it was such a iconic name for a class of nouns that a cognitive linguist, George Lakoff, wrote a book about it with that title. So, when we come back to First Nations languages, we do have noun classes or nouns that seem to be divided up differently. And one of the ones that we find in both Stoney Nakoda here in Alberta and also in the Blackfoot language and the Cree language is animacy. So, and also in Stoney Nakoda to some degree, whether things are human or not is encoded into language. So there's a difference between the way we talk about humans, or more than one human, than when we talk about most animals, and also different again than how we talk about animals, and humans are different again than how we talk about inanimate objects like plants or clothing or books or anything that doesn't move on its own. So rocks, anything like that. So we see that in these languages, they're making the distinctions that we all naturally make, I guess, in the way we think about the world, are actually encoded directly into the language. Now, in English, we don't do that. We know there's a difference between animate and inanimate things, but we have to explain it or or use our language to talk about it in a different way. Whereas in Stoney Nakoda, it's actually implicit in the way we use the language, in the way the language is.
Is this animacy embedded somewhere in the grammar, in the form?
Yes, absolutely. So it's embedded mostly in the plurals in the case of both all of the Dakotan languages, I would say. So when you talk about more than one of something, you do it differently for humans, for animals, and for inanimate objects. So different for all three of them. So there's kind of almost a three-way division there.
You're listening to CJSW 90.9 FM radio station. This is Linguistically Aware. My name is Dusan, and I am talking to Corey Telfer about the indigenous language, documentation, preservation, and revitalization. It is interesting that in these languages, certain animals are human-like, and I think this is embedded in grammar of the language. What can you tell us about that? Why are some animals human-like and some others are not?
Or maybe it's just that they're close to humans. It's not exactly clear. Or sometimes, or it could be that they're kind of being promoted up to human-like agency or importance also. So it might, for example, I haven't heard it for sure, but eagles might follow that pattern as well. And at least one of the words for bear, it seems, as optional. It normally wouldn't be using the human plural, but it can be. So it just depends on the situation. And then some animals like moose, it can never be put in that human category. It just doesn't sound right to speakers and they reject it. So so it's sort of unpredictable as well, I should mention, and it's not clear exactly why one animal is gone one way and another animal a different way, or why and it requires a lot more work for us to look at stories, for example, and looking at how people use the language in everyday life to kind of understand, for example, in that case of bear, when might a bear actually be given a bit more given this human ending, or is it ever actually done in real language, or in it's my guess is it's probably very, very rare based on what I've heard from elders and just what I've heard of the language also. And it's probably very, very rare, but speakers will accept it and say it's possible. So really interesting thing going on there, where some animals are almost human like, are treated like humans in one way by the language. With horses, it's quite clear, they're very important to the culture and have been for a long time. And it's my understanding that dogs actually played a similar role to horses before horses were introduced, and continued to be important. But dogs were, as I understand, pack animals. I shouldn't say pack animals, draft animals, really. They would be used for pulling things around. They would be used to help, so they were a great assistance in that way. Although as far as I know, they probably weren't used traditionally for hunting, but they may have played other roles as well
Yeah.
besides.
Yeah, that would be a very good question to ask an elder.
Yeah,
And
absolutely, yeah.
and I guess that language is an expression of culture and it is essential. So this is where the answer to the question why comes into play.
Well, I just want to say, again, with looking at how languages work, we can learn a lot more about human thought and cognition. And another element is that the Dakotan languages seem to encode. Well, a lot of people say two different kinds of verbs, like actions and states.
Yeah.
So things like states are usually like just a condition that you're in, like what color you are, or if you're painted a certain color, or if you're tall or if you're short, but also more temporary things like if you're wet or if you're dry, things like that. Whereas actions would be more like running, jumping, walking, those kind of things where you're actually moving. However, and English doesn't make a distinction; they're all just verbs for us. However, another linguist, specifically Marianne Mithun, has argued that that this could be kind of reconceptualized a little bit as encoding volitionality. Volitionality just means whether you want to do something or whether you're doing something on purpose or whether it's happening against your will or out of your control, whether you have control over it, whether someone has control over it, or whether no one has control over it, or you don't have control over it. So, and there's some good arguments to be made. I think that these languages do encode volitionality, although there's of course certain verbs that break this pattern that don't really seem to fit the pattern, but it is really an interesting area, and we just don't really know at this point. We need more research in order to find out, and it's there are other languages, of course, that do this as well outside of the Siouan language family. But again, every language shows us some of these insights into how things are divided up, and
Mhm.
of course, in English or other languages, we can express whether something is done on purpose or not. Usually we have to say on purpose, so and so did this on purpose or by accident. So we have to use these extra words, but it
Yeah.
seems like in the Dakotan languages this is automatically built into everything you say. Every time you use a verb,
Mhm.
it's sort of it can be implied to some degree. As I said, it doesn't always work out, but in many cases it does, and it's I think it's a really interesting area of future research and just understanding, coming to an understanding of different ways of seeing the world too, where it is broken down more in possibly in this way. But that is still somewhat controversial, and we're still coming to be a long time coming to an understanding on that. Another idea is that these languages are sometimes called topic comment languages or topic prominent languages, where sometimes it's or frequently it seems when someone's talking about something, they introduce a general topic first and then say something about it. And Japanese is apparently also a language that works like this. So you could almost think of it as maybe also a general specific kind of language. You introduce the general area that you're talking about and then say something specific about it. So the example is something like me, I I stole the horses. Whereas in
Mhm.
English we just say I stole horses or I caught horses, something like that. But in Lakota, you might say, you introduce the topic first. Me, I'm saying something
Mhm.
about myself. I was the one who caught the horses, without necessarily meaning any extra emphasis. It's just the natural way you say I caught the horses. So yeah, this is a very advanced area. I'm not really in a position to say anything specific about Stony Nakota on that area, but it's an area that needs more research and really again sheds more light into the possible ways that humans can think about the world or speak about the world or express themselves about the world. So tells us a lot about human cognition and then just the diversity of languages and the way languages can work. Language is very complex and we still don't really know how it works. We know some
Yeah.
basic things, but really very little. There's still, as far as I understand, no computer that can emulate what we humans do by the time we're 2 or 3 years old. So it's really an interesting area and an area of human knowledge. I think that's very important for us to understand really about who we are as people. It's not gonna probably make a difference to whether we um, survive to the next day, whether we know these things about human language. But as I mentioned before, there's a lot more to being human than just surviving. It's also about
Of course.
gaining knowledge, understanding how the world works, and understanding ourselves. And the more we
Yeah,
know, I think the the better the better we can do, the better societies we can create.
I most certainly agree. Uh, Corey, can you tell me who do you think should be involved in language documentation?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question that I really haven't heard before. But I mean, the first answer is, of course, everyone should be involved. But but then maybe it does take specialized knowledge to do a lot of the tasks that need to be done. But when I say everyone, first of all, it does come down to the number one thing about language documentation that I haven't mentioned so far is that the real goal for a lot of the work we're doing isn't just documentation. I think the end goal is revitalization,
Mm-hmm.
making sure these languages don't disappear. And documentation is just one of the things we need to do that can help revitalize a language. It gives learners resources to use to revitalize that language. So, um, and so when everyone's involved, I think the one thing that everyone can do is try and learn a little bit of a language, or promote others learning that language, give others the resources they need to learn a language, because although learning a language in a way doesn't take a lot of resources, or doing linguistics work, we don't need um, to build, like uh, nuclear reactors, or what do they call the these multi-billion-dollar infrastructures that they need to build to do a lot of sciences. We need very little, you
Yeah,
know,
we don't need a
um,
lot of resources and tools and equipment and
yeah, all we need
expensive
is a
ones.
room.
Yeah,
Yeah, usually a computer, a microphone, a camera, some paper. We don't
yeah,
necessarily need a lot of, actual physical objects. But when it comes to revitalizing languages, that takes time. It takes people time to learn languages. And time, of course,
yeah,
means that they're spending time learning the language and not doing other things. So they need to be supported, often some degree financially. And so that's where another place people can come in supporting that is recognizing the time and effort it takes to learn these languages means that some resources are helpful to doing that.
of
But then
course.
beyond that, if we get a little bit more specialized, I think uh, especially people who come from endangered language communities, whether that's indigenous languages, but it can also be languages like Scottish Gaelic in Nova Scotia, in Scotland also, but in right in Canada, in Nova Scotia, especially in Cape Breton Island, is also an endangered language, and they're doing a lot of work there to revitalize it, right alongside the Mi'kmaq or Mi'kmaq language that's spoken also in that area.
Mhm.
So so anyone from an endangered language community can, of course, start learning your language from your elders, from people that know it. But also, I have to recommend that in some cases, I think it is useful, not for everyone, but for certain people who might be interested, to take some courses in
Yeah,
learning a bit more about how languages work can be very, very helpful. And both the Language Conservancy offers courses specifically for just a few languages at this time. As far as I understand, I think Lakota, they've done work though also for, I believe, cowlits on the west coast of British Columbia,
hmm,
and working towards, I think, things of this nature for Crow and other languages as well, and hopefully eventually Stony Nakota. But also here in Alberta, we have the Canadian Indigenous Languages and Literacy Development Institute, more easily known as
hmm,
SILDI, which is based out of the University of Alberta, where I attended and taught for some time. So SILDI, I have to highly recommend it. It's usually in the summertime, and it offers all kinds of courses in education, um, indigenous studies or native studies, and linguistics. And these are university level courses. They count as
hmm.
university credit, so people can put them towards a degree if they're working on a degree. And they also have a what's called a CLC, or Community Linguist Certificate, where they help if someone takes these 6 courses required for that, they get a certificate that is recognized in Alberta and I believe in the Northwest Territories, saying that they have taken these courses and they have become a community linguist. So I think that's very useful. So it gives some very useful tools and skills, and also a network of people for people interested in doing this kind of work. And CILDI typically serves all of Western Canada. Especially a lot of people come from the Northwest Territories, but also Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia, as well as Alberta. So it's a fantastic institute in the summer, and in some cases, CILDI has gone to other community, right to First Nations communities, to teach these kind of courses in the community to try and help local people get the skills they need to work on their own language. So these kind of things, I think, are very useful because, unfortunately, language is, as I mentioned earlier, although we all use it every day, actually understanding how it works is somewhat complicated. And so it can be quite technical. And then also because we're using computers to do a lot of this work, that can also be technical in a different way. So I think it is, it's specialized skills, and we sometimes have to take some time to gain those specialized skills. So it is useful to get those skills, and then it can help someone become a bit more useful to their language community in revitalizing and documenting the language.
Yeah, I completely agree. But what's elders' role in all of this? What should they do?
Well, I think if they just make themselves available, that's really all we can ask of them, right? Just their time, sharing their time and their knowledge with us, and teaching. Like in the case of Buddy, he is actually a teacher teaching the language outside of university in some of the local communities in the Bow Valley region. So Banff, Canmore, Cochrane, for example, and we would like to see courses. We don't know exactly what's going on for adult courses right now in the Stoney Nakoda community, because I would say any adult over the age of 40 almost certainly speaks the language, anyone who grew up in the community. And even over 30, there are a lot of fluent speakers, but below that, younger than 35 and certainly younger than 30, not as many. So there is a need there for teaching as well. And so elders, if they're willing to teach, that's really fantastic. But we all know that I think everybody who has experience trying to teach, it's not for everyone, right? It takes special personality and sometimes special skills as well. So, but yeah, that's another role of elders. And but I think that biggest role is just being available, being willing to share their knowledge of their language.
Corey, thank you for this. Thank you very much. I won't keep you anymore. I just want to ask you, what are your future plans?
Well, I am planning on finishing up all these resources for this first part of this project for the Stoney Nakoda First Nation, and it's my hope that there will be more work in the future with language. The work is never done. Dictionaries are never done. We know that even for our English language, which has been documented for hundreds of years, every year the Oxford English Dictionary is still adding new words to the dictionary. So as linguists, our work is never done. There's always more to do. There's always more to understand. So I'm hoping to just continue on with that, and continue teaching at the University of Calgary if I can, and just continue on. I think that's my goal for the moment. Yeah, go from there.
Thank you, Corey, for being a wonderful guest, for answering all my questions, and for a 2-part episode. This was the first one, and I appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been great talking to you, and great to see you again.
That was a phenomenal Corey Telfer. I immensely enjoyed our conversation, and this was the second part of our entire conversation and the 6th episode of Linguistically Aware. If you want to contact Corey, you can reach him at corey.telfer@ucalgary.ca. If you want to know more about linguists based in Calgary, you may reach them at calgarylinguistics.ca. If you want to listen to the upcoming episodes of Linguistically Aware, go to the CJSW website, hit Program, hit Linguistically Aware, and make sure to hit subscribe. You're in the right place. Do not change the frequency. Stay tuned to the CJSW 90.9 FM. See you soon.